Hello, welcome to Brunch Latam. I wish you are having an excellent morning, afternoon, or evening, and expect that today's dynamic will be full of new insights and knowledge from our experts. My name is Ramses Sanchez. I am the Commercial Director of Latam-Eurasia Consulting Group. And on behalf of the Latam-Eurasia team, I offer you the warmest welcome from the city of Saint-Petersburg, Russia. I want to start today's activity by briefly explaining that one of the main objectives of Latam-Eurasia is to create bridges of dialogue between the Latin American region and the Eurasian zone. In a particular way, the online sessions at Brunch Latam have the purpose of approaching experts to learn their points of view on issues that, due to their complexity or misinformation, could be considered not relevant to our daily lives. In the last years, humanity has embraced a fourth revolution by embracing the evolution of a new digital environment. In the previous months, the accelerating effects of COVID-19 pandemic, organizations and states have increased effects about what it's affecting in the worldwide. As a result, we have an increased digitalization speed resulting in a digital realm for how we live, work, and interact. Hence, a new digital environment opens the quest for innumerable technological appliances to make human life more manageable. Critical technologies, starting with essential info communication technologies and communications infrastructure, to emerging ones such as 5G, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, are part of this digital realm that opens the debate between cooperation and potential threats. As a result, the way we understand collaboration among organizations and states is underpinning to create more secure and interoperable cyberspace. From a cooperative perspective, the transformation and borderless nature of cyber threats inevitably means that states, as well as organizations, must work together to safeguard the cybersecurity to our critical infrastructure, businesses, and people. Then understanding this emerging economic and political relevance of Asia-Pacific region becomes necessary regarding its global implications, and on a scale ranging from cooperation to conflict to coexistence, competition, and confrontation. Therefore, I am delighted to welcome our experts who will be joining us today. So how are you, Megumi, Israel, and Sharmaine? It's a pleasure having you all on live directly from Monterrey, Mexico City, and St. Petersburg. Hi.
Gracias.
Hi, everyone.
Здравствуйте все. Добрый вечер.
Добрый вечер. Всем привет.
Всем привет.
So, thank you very much again for your time, your speakers. So if you don't mind, let's start today's activities by briefly explaining to our audience the agenda. In the first part, we will have a presentation of each of our speakers who are kindly reminded that they have 10 minutes per presentation. In the end, we will have some space to interact with our audience, having a questions and answer session. And I also kindly remind our audience to send your questions directly in the comment section on Facebook to share them with our guests. Finally, I would like to thank the Latam crew in Backstage, which support is fundamental to have a better interaction using this online dynamic. So let's begin. We'll put a little bit remove and start with Megumi. To have a brief introduction about today's relevance of Asia-Pacific region, Megumi Terui will speak with her presentation as a Pacific geopolitical lens of the region. But before I give you the floor, Megumi, I would like to give a brief review of your professional experience. It's okay for you. Megumi holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from Tec de Monterrey and holds a master's degree in communication studies from the University of Rhode Island. As an analyst for the East Asia region, she is part of the Mexico chapter for the Latin American Association for Asian and African Studies. Currently, she collaborates with the Korea Foundation E-School for Latin America and is part of the editorial board of the international section of El Norte at Grupo Reforma. Megumi is a recent member of the Association for Asian Studies, and as a professor at Tec de Monterrey, she teaches multicultural perspective, diversity in a globalized world, global agenda, and East Asian studies. Please, Megumi, the floor is yours.
So much. I am going to be sharing with all of you my screen in one moment.
Please.
There we go. Well, first of all, I want to thank Ramses and his team at Latam-Eurasia Consulting Group for this invitation to join you this morning in Mexico, evening in Russia. And congratulations on this initiative. I was invited here to summarize in less than 10 minutes the geopolitical implications of current events in the Asia-Pacific region. And being the world's largest region that includes almost 60 nation states and territories, the most populated, with conflicting economic, political, and even cultural powerhouses, I am not going to be able to provide with an exhaustive list of analysis of issues, but rather I have selected what, in my opinion, are the most relevant and to provide an introduction to my partners in this panel, who will be addressing topics related to cybersecurity and ASEAN. First of all, let's begin with North Korea. One of the looming situations in the region is what's taking place in the Korean Peninsula. While the regime of Kim Jong-un has remained relatively quiet during the first few weeks of the Biden administration, by no means is the situation fixed or even improved. The so-called negotiations under Trump were fruitless, and they were really nothing more than photo ops for both leaders to their intended audiences. Just following developments inside North Korea is going to become particularly important for today's topic, as several cyber attacks against important overseas targets have seemed to have originated from this country. The Biden administration has not yet defined a detailed strategy on North Korea. Just this week, President Biden called for North Korea's nuclear program to be labeled a serious threat to American and global security. And Secretary Blinken has traditionally taken a hawkish position on the North Korean matter, and it seems to be keen on deterrence. One of the few positive signs that we see in this matter is how President Biden keeps on calling for diplomacy and reliance on its allies in the region, which is for sure a welcome message by Moon's government in South Korea. Another developing issue in the region that has been the center of attention for the last couple of months is the coup d'etat in Myanmar. Just last week, on April 24, ASEAN convened in a special summit to address how they can engage with the Burmese military junta without compromising the future stability in Myanmar. To date, over 700 civilians have been killed in the aftermath of the military takeover. And Myanmar already was the epicenter of one of the worst cases of current-day genocide against the Rohingya ethnic minority in the hands of Buddhist extremists, who have been backed up by both paramilitary and military groups. So far, the meeting reached an agreement with lukewarm results. In theory, the representatives of Myanmar military agreed to the immediate cessation of violence, the start of dialogue between all parties, the appointment of mediation through ASEAN assistance, but local reports have indicated that violence has not stopped. This is an ongoing situation that not only threatens the security in the area, but additionally is one of the main tests that ASEAN has to prove itself against. And since no analysis of the region could ever be complete without considering the implications of the rise of China as a regional power, I want to devote the rest of my time to talk about a few topics connected with this country. First, the impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative in Asia Pacific. On one side, President Xi's Belt and Road Initiative has placed a lot of resources into the hands of governments around the region that haven't had access to financing through international organizations such as the IMF, allowing them to build much needed infrastructure. This is the case of places like, for example, Sri Lanka or Pakistan, which, due to their own political instability, have been lagging behind in several development indicators. And China's BRI provides them with resources they need to develop. But as they say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. These resources, part of them are financed through national debt. And that has drawn international criticism, many calling the BRI a debt trap for these countries. Regarding the BRI, more recently, Australia's national government forced the state of Victoria to go back on an agreement between that state and China's government to include Victoria in the program. This has provoked a very strong reaction from Beijing, which has accused the Australian government of causing serious harm to the bilateral relation. This example illustrates the pressure being faced by many around the region. For many, China's market represents a trade opportunity at a time of declining consumption in other global markets. And while trade itself is not really part of the BRI, having good relations with Beijing certainly helps. In terms of security, the tensions created by the incursion of China in several of these different parts of the region has been at the center of some acts of violence, or at the very least provocations. We can think, for example, of the attack against the Chinese ambassador in Pakistan in the region of Balochistan, which is one of many in the past few years targeted against Chinese citizens, Chinese companies, Chinese workers, or their Pakistani partners in the region. It is also said that the Chinese Navy has had more access than previously disclosed in several of the ports that have been built through the Belt and Road Initiative, which, for an already conflicted maritime zone, definitely raises the level of tension. And this is by no means a simple matter. The South China Sea is one of the busiest areas in the world in terms of trade. According to information from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, around 70% of all global trade is transported by sea. And from that, 60% goes through Asia. Just the South China Sea carries around one-third of all global shipping, which gives an estimate of trade between 3.5 to $5 trillion each year for the past 10 years. For the countries of the region, then, this issue is both on one side, one of national security and sovereignty, and the other one of economics. Sometimes smaller countries in the region seem to have either decided or being forced or pushed into prioritizing economic security. Such is the case, for example, of Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. The Philippines has had a long-standing conflict with China over the control of the Scarborough Shoals in the South China Sea. After not only displays of military power by China that made it very clear that the Philippines had no way of defending itself, the unreliability of the US to come to Philippines' defense under Donald Trump, but most importantly, perhaps, a series of trade restrictions imposed by China to products coming from the Philippines made it clear that Duterte had nothing to gain from engaging in conflict with China, and in the end ended up signing multiple treaties with Beijing. The consequences of potential disruption of global trade or another conflict in these waters could provoke has the potential to bring the global economy to its knees at a time in which already economic growth is being crippled by the COVID pandemic. And as a reaction to Beijing's efforts, the United States has been trying to counterbalance its reach through different means. The failed pivot to Asia efforts of the Obama administration seem to have only placed American allies in the region in very uncomfortable positions vis-a-vis Beijing. For many of these countries, China is their main destination for exports and its main source of foreign direct investment. The United States accuses China of what it calls predatory economics, and initially, under Obama, pretended to have the Trans-Pacific Partnership to be an alternative for these countries. Trump's withdrawal from the TPP did not send the right signal to this region. The free and open Indo-Pacific strategy of his administration lacked direction and resources. So in the end, many Asian countries have sided with Beijing. We will have to wait and see if Biden's government manages to change the tide. I believe it's a good sign that it's making efforts to build on previous alliances and to rely on other partners in the region. One example is the online summit that took place last month of the Quad. By joining forces with Australia, Japan, and India, the United States has a better chance of providing a less conflicting transition into a world in which China becomes the main regional power in Asia without shaking the current global order to a point that brings these two superpowers into a major armed conflict. And lastly, what can we expect in the region? Without a fast recovery of the global economy, the People's Republic of China seems to be one of the only major economies that's going to experience a considerable amount of growth this year, and that is going to make them keep on growing their influence in the region. China has been having issues with other powers in the region, such as India, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and these can find a more reliable partner in Biden. However, for the American government, domestic politics are still going to be a priority, which leaves ASEAN in a position of having to find more powerful mechanisms to deal with the situation in which these different countries have been caught between the power play between the United States and China. And with that, I finish my intervention here. I hope that it has given you what we call a glance of the region as an introduction to the talks from my two partners in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megumi, for your presentation. It was really, as you already explained, an introduction. I know it's a challenge to talk about the Asia Pacific region in just a short period of time. So you did a great work. Thank you so much again. And I would like just to do a quick question, because you explained about the Chinese predominance in the region and this imbalance of power, right? And how is it now managed by some powers like US and other powers in the region? So what do you think about having a closer engagement with the other countries, for example, Taiwan, to learn from their experiences on how they deal with the Chinese government? For example, like countries like Australia and Philippines, for example, Asian countries, for example.
Well, it really depends on which specific country we're talking about, because we cannot place Australia or Japan in the same box as the Philippines or even one of the tinier islands, right? We're talking about a region that's full of very, very, very small nation states whose reliance on any type of aid or economic help or opportunities they can get from China, it's going to become crucial. And that actually is what explains why in the past 15 to 20 years, a lot of these smaller nation states in the region have actually stopped recognizing Taiwan as an independent country, like smaller countries, especially around the Micronesia and Polynesia. So the type of power that those countries may have is really close to none. And the predominance of Beijing is very clear, also because they also don't have another alternative. And that's what's starting to happen with other types of countries that perhaps are among the case of, I'm thinking like the Philippines, right? Which is what I just explained. Like they are in a position, or they were in a position in which they perhaps could start to place some resistance to China, especially regarding sovereignty. They were being backed up by the United States, so they felt empowered through that. But once the United States leaves them alone, then what's the option? Which is, of course, not comparable to what countries like Japan, South Korea, and India may have, being more powerful economically, being more able to rely on their own resources, and also the fact that these other countries have more powerful military resources. So I guess this is one of the challenges when one talks about the Asia Pacific region, right? Like the diversity of countries, both in size and power.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Megumi. Thank you so much again. So we will be back in a few minutes at the end of the session with the questions and answers. And now it was a turn for Professor Israel. So thank you, Professor Israel, for being here. It's a pleasure having you here. And before your presentation, Professor, I would like to give the audience a brief resemblance of your professional background, if it's okay for you. Thank you. So Israel is graduated in applied mathematics and computer sciences and holds advanced studies in cybersecurity, incident response, and crisis management from the Stanford University and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. He has more than 20 years of experience working in the USA, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Australasia to advocate for national resilience and cybersecurity. Also, he has worked with four major global companies on homeland security, defense, and strategy worldwide. Currently, Israel is professor at the George Washington University and actively collaborates with private and government agencies in diverse intelligence projects regarding cybersecurity intelligence, cyber resilience, data sovereignty, among other topics regarding intelligence and national security. Please, Israel, the floor is yours.
Спасибо. Здравствуйте все. Добрый вечер. This is a very interesting times where we are right now, especially in the relationship between Asia and the West. In this case, to be specifically, between China, the United States, and what is happening. So in aspects of geopolitics, we have seen how the cyberspace now is the new landscape of influence. We have seen like APT-10, which is from People's Liberation Army from China, has been hyperactive in cyber attacks and cyber intrusions. We saw that happening in Australia last year. We have seen that happening during the elections times in the United States. And then before in 2016, we also saw some influence from foreign countries into the elections. So what we see right now in the global landscape, it's a very hyperactivity in cyber intrusion, cyber intelligence, cyber espionage. And it seems to be like we have a lack of regulation, international agreements, and how we're gonna be dealing with the cyberspace. One of the concerns now is that in cyberspace we have anonymity. So there is very difficult to identify who is the actors behind the scenes, because usually, as we all know, they use sophisticated tools and VPNs, which make really hard to find what's the IP addresses. But what we have seen is a lot of ransomware, a lot of intrusion into critical infrastructure, and nevertheless into the election systems. Recently in the United States, it was a big problem in between China and the 5G, and who will be in charge to deploy this technology? Because as we know, now in this era where the data is the most important asset, well, whoever controls that infrastructure to the global level, you're gonna have a lot of power, not only to acquire the data or process the data, but also to be able to influence an election systems. So what is the problem here right now? Well, the problem is that the technology, we are adapting so quick, so fast, and we have not so much about resiliency protocols or inclusive like incident response or protocols that can help us to mitigate those risks. Now, the 5G, we know that whoever the country will dominate that space will have the supremacy of the technology. And that is where the problem is. So we know, like in this specific case, an APT-10 is one of the most aggressive groups in targeting foreign governments. As I said, it is targeting constantly Australia, New Zealand, United States, England, and sometimes even Canada, with interesting enough, is part of the alliance of the Five Eyes Alliance. So yes, there is a lot of activity in geopolitics, and cyberspace now is the space where everything is going, like cyber attacks, cyber intrusions, intellectual property theft, and all that strategic communications and strategic data. Recently in Mexico, we also have identified how the group from North Korea, which is called Hidden Group, also successfully attacked Banco de Mexico, Banjico. That was proven that happened by that. We also saw the cyber attack against the energy sector in Mexico. In this case was Pemex, where we know that the tools that they were using at the time were tools for stealing intellectual property, which were done or being used for APT-10. So yeah, without doubts, we are in a very interesting times. It's a lot of challenge here. There is a need to create a legislation to the national level to defend the sovereignty in the cyberspace, but there is also a need to start to create like cyber security and protection of critical infrastructure agencies, because as I said at the time, we have a lack of legislation and international agreements to protect that sector. There is some of the concerns that we have in the developed countries and also in the underdeveloped countries. We also have the big problem with the cyber-enabled information warfare, how the social media is playing a big part to influence the masses, the population. We call that hacking the human brain. So we know, like in the United States, we are through a very incredible and a very deep polarization effect in the society. We saw what happened in the 6th of January in 2020, And then we also have that problem in Mexico, but we have that same problem in many countries, even in New Zealand and Australia. And it is because foreign countries, which they have economic interests, or they are adversaries because military or economic or technological and natural adversaries, those groups are using those platforms to produce disinformation campaigns to change the governments and to align a government which is more according to the long-run objectives. And we know that China is playing very hard in that sector. Even during Donald Trump, he didn't want the population to be using TikTok because there was a lot of fake news, there was a lot of fake videos that for sure were influencing in the decision-taking process of the population. So this is where we are, and this is where we need to focus, without doubt, to start to work in a regulation, an international regulation, to mitigate this problem. And because, as I say, the cyberspace, that is the most important on these days, because it's the space that has a direct correlation with any other domain, like territorial, maritime, space, and air domain.
Sorry, yes, I was muted. Thank you so much again, Israel, for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I will just do this question about the social media issues and the relevance to understand the international law regulations. Because of this experience you're having directly in the working with governments and with the companies, what do you think about having this private and public collaboration to have an international regulation that can respond to this emerging issue regarding social media?
Well, yeah. Now the social media, that is a cyber weapon, and the information, we talk about information warfare. We talk about cyber-enabled information warfare and manipulation. And one of the problems that we have here is because we use law as a warfare, because we have like the freedom of speech, which is allowed to everyone to be able to express their political ideas and intentions. But the problem that we have in the social media platforms and in the cyber-enabled space is that in many cases they are bots. There are automatic propaganda. There is not a person. That is artificial intelligence, machine learning, which are doing disinformation campaigns. Now, if we take in consideration the cyber psychology, which my wife is an expert in cyber psychology, she talks about the effect and how people, it is really easy to manipulate when we recall those negative emotions like the hate. Those hate and uncertainty are emotions that are hardwired in our brain, and we respond very easy to that ones. So we became angry, we became upset, and we start to spread and to be contagious in those negative emotions to the point that it can create ungovernability for a government, what we call a soft cop against the governments. Now, the problem here is like companies like Facebook, like Twitter, Instagram, it's not in their best interest to create regulation, because they depend on how much traffic they are moving in those social media. Their value depends in how much data they are collecting from the citizens. So that's concerning, because it's like kidnapping the democracies. Like if someone is able to propagate disinformation, fake news, deep fakes, that will change the democracies for the future. And actually, like in China, that was one of the reasons why the government there did not allow Twitter, Facebook, and Google to be in China, because they know China has 1.2 billion citizens, and they need to be somehow to be governed, to be control over those populations. So China has developed a lot implementing big data analytics and doing surveillance almost in real time. But on the other hand, in more open countries like the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, France, England, where they do believe more in the freedom of speech, now this is turning against them. Now this is a cyber weapon that is going against them.
against
And
the
as an
government.
example, we know what happened in January 6th in the United States. And we don't know what can happen in Mexico, but we know we have a very deep conflict on polarization.
Exactly. I agree with you, Israel. Thank you so much. I know that we can continue this discussion at the end with Megumi and Sharmaine. So now is the turn for Sharmaine, and we will be back in the questions and answer section. Thank you, please. Thank you again. So now is the time for Sharmaine. Is last but not least, of course, and I would like to introduce Sharmaine Marmita. So
Hola.
Sharmaine, hi.
Hello, здравствуйте. Hello.
Здравствуйте. So I would like to give you some words about your professional background, Sharmaine, if it's okay.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Perfect. So Sharmaine Marmita holds a master's degree in international relations from St. Petersburg State University in Russia, specializing in ASEAN's counterterrorism matters. She's currently completing her PhD studies in international relations and war politics, specialized in security in Southeast Asia. Her work experience ranges from writing journal columns and volunteering in cultural centers back in the Philippines to working for an artificial intelligence company in Russia. Sharmaine actively participates in conferences and seminars about Russia's relations to the Asia-Pacific region while completing her research work on regional security. Now, please, Sharmaine, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ramses. So let me share my screen for everybody to see. Okay, so this is mainly my topic for our discussion for today. So basically, I'll be talking about ASEAN struggles in cybersecurity. I hope everybody could see my screen right now. First of all, we had a very, very good introduction, and I would really like to thank Megumi and Mr. Gómez for all the information that they have given. So it's like an introduction, and really a big part of my topic comes from it. So basically, I would like to clarify first here what is the difference between cybercrime, cyber attack, and cyber terrorism. So all these three, they are kind of plaguing the ASEAN region. So if I would just give a brief introduction to it, cybercrime is basically the ones that that is characterized by individuals or groups disrupting the system for the sake of financial gain. So this is more like a financial security problem in that sense. Cyber attack is a little bit more political because it is politically motivated and usually involves illegal information extraction. On the other hand, there is the very intense form of cyber terrorism, which actually sabotages systems with the intent of causing panic or fear to the public. So the scope is bigger for this one because it could actually be affecting whole states in that sense. So what about the region of ASEAN? So what are the examples of cyber attacks in the Southeast Asian region, which I will be talking about first? So we have a lot of cyber attacks in the Southeast Asian region, even though it is not super obvious. In the ASEAN, the digital economy is actually estimated to be around $150 billion. But maybe it actually has the potential to add up to $1 trillion by 2025 if the influx of cyber risks do not add up. So basically, we are losing, for example, the world is losing at least 1% of its GDP annually due to cyber attacks that we are experiencing. So for example, 1% may seem very small, but this could actually lead to if we try to translate it, it could be like millions or billions. So for example, if we have a look at this over here in this small diagram, I will give you a few examples of some cyber attacks that have occurred in the ASEAN. So for example, in Singapore before, it's actually a paradox of cybersecurity because Singapore is among the 10 member states of the ASEAN, it is both extremely secure and also considered to be part of the Cyber Five. which is like the countries of the ASEAN that are highly vulnerable to cyber attacks due to their reliance on technology. So this is a cybersecurity paradox, but in this sense, it is not a laughing matter. So actually, here are the lessons that we got from it. So cybersecurity teams in Singapore have actually faced several challenges. So it includes ransomwares, for example, data breaches, and one of the biggest ones actually was when there was a worst data breach, basically in that country, in which the hackers stole about 1.5 million of patients' data in the National Electronic Health Record Project. Okay, so another country in the Southeast Asian region that has cyber attacks, for example, is Myanmar. So usually Myanmar, it's a little bit secluded in terms of like the surveys because it's they have a little like bit of a policy, different policies. But for example, they are also subject to cyber attacks. So for example, in 2010, there was a DDoS attack in Myanmar, and it occurred just a few days before the election. So in a way, it was a bit worse than the Estonia case in 2007. So in this sense, it actually sabotaged some of the political things. So basically, in this sense, we could say that people call themselves their hacktivists because they were hacking as a form of activism. And basically, it happens in a lot of countries and as forms of cyber attacks. What about the budgets that the ASEAN has in this sense? So if the ASEAN has budgets, then why are cyber attacks happening? So basically, as you could see here, in about 10 years, you will see a gradual increase in the budget of ASEAN, well, in terms of spending for cybersecurity. Okay, so, and what are the biggest threats that we face in the ASEAN? So these are the most common ones: identity theft, data breach, ransomware, DDoS attacks, and phishing. And especially now with the coronavirus situation, this thing is getting, more frequent because a lot of people are working from home or depending on technology. Online banking is on the high right now. And because of that, our data is basically very much vulnerable to all these people who want to do some, cyber crimes in that sense. So what about the APAC? What can the APAC learn from this cybersecurity struggles of the ASEAN region? So first of all, the total economic loss of the Asia Pacific is about 1.7 trillion US dollars because of cyber attacks. That is no joke because that is 7% of Asia Pacific's GDP. And for example, as we see here, as of 2020, APAC is actually the fastest growing market when it comes to cybersecurity in the whole world. And there's the largest market in North America, but a lot of companies in APAC are actually trying to purchase cybersecurity equipment for this. So for example, here we see another prediction for 10 years. There will be a rapid growth of the cybersecurity market share for the Asia Pacific region. So what about the precautions that we are taking? How can the APAC actually stop the cyber attacks? So here are a few tips from Microsoft that I got from their website. So basically, let me go back to this. So I'm going to zoom in this part. What are the most common attacks that countries in the Asia Pacific region are experiencing? So we've got, for example, there's the most common: cloud infrastructure and services, cybersecurity. They are the main focus of these countries: Australia, Malaysia, Singapore. It was also noted that, for example, there is really like less cyber attacks in, or like less investment in cybersecurity, for example, in countries such as Japan, New Zealand, and maybe Australia, because they already have a super strong cybersecurity measures for this and really, really big budget. That's why, in that sense, they are less prone to cyber attacks. Going back to this, what could be the best practices for the Asia Pacific region when it comes to cybersecurity? So for organizations, especially now that a lot of companies have their workers working at home online, it is best to invest in some prevention. So like some antivirus, we need some cyber hygiene, genuine software. Definitely, I know that sometimes genuine software could be expensive, but it's really a great investment in the sense that cybersecurity will actually cost you more money if you try to, just try to skimp on it. And in this sense, there are a lot of attractive opportunities in the cybersecurity market for the Asia Pacific region. So the Asia Pacific region is actually a growing market, and it's a good thing that the cybersecurity market in the Asia Pacific is actually recognizing that this threat is here to stay and it will actually be here for long. So in that sense, we are looking forward to a stronger cybersecurity cooperation between different organizations in the Asia Pacific and ASEAN markets. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharmaine. It was a perfect timing for your presentation also. Thank you so much again, as well as the other speakers. So you talk really like interesting topics, and I will just maybe would like to talk about the best practices to invest in prevention. Yeah, because well, as in other emerging countries, I believe Asian region can teach the lessons that can be replied, right? So what do you think are the main issues that can be replicated as is well done in the Asian countries that can be replicated for other emerging countries and regarding security?
For example, in security, there is always cooperation because with every regional group or organization, people try to share intelligence, people try to share best practices in this way. And for example, in ASEAN, they, of course, pool the funds or the budget for this. So like there is like a common budget for this. So for example, if there is a data breach in this country, it is a learning experience for the other country as well. And we have in the ASEAN what we call, for example, in terms of security, the 5 Eyes. So these are 5 different countries who are actually sharing intelligence so that, for example, if there will be a threat to any of the nations included, they will be prepared to face it beforehand. So best practice.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Sharmaine. And now we'll bring back our other speakers to the question and answers section. And I saw that there are some questions on Facebook. And well, I will start maybe with the first question that was written by Manuel Abdullah. So he asked, since Taiwan is losing allies, what options are left for them to achieve their goal of being recognized as a nation state? I believe this can be regarding to the comment with you, Megumi, we were talking about Taiwan, right?
I think so. So if my other don't mind, I will take this one. I have to confess I'm not very positive that Taiwan is going to be able to keep it much longer. For example, perhaps the case of Paraguay in Latin America, which is one of the few remaining recognizing Taiwan as an independent state. The ideological position of the Paraguayan government makes it to be in very close alliance with the position of President Tsai's government in Taiwan. So the problem is what happens after President Tsai comes out of power and another type of ideological political party takes control in Taiwan, or there's a change of government in Paraguay, right? So all of that places Taiwan in a very vulnerable position. That being said, I think like all of these, I don't know, for example, this morning I was checking out The Economist and they've had this very alarmist calling Taiwan the most dangerous place on earth, which is definitely an overstatement. Certainly there has been rising of tensions. The Chinese PLA has had incursions into Taiwanese airspace. But for the most part, all parties involved are interested in maintaining the status quo. So I think that sadly, answering directly to this question posed, I think very much, there's not much that they can do other than trying to keep the status quo as long as possible.
if possible, I will just maybe would like to complete this question regarding the experience of Israel and Sharmaine about cyber psychology and social media. Because as we know, as already explained, well, Chinese government is controlling all social media inside, right? But what about the Taiwanese experience on social media? What do you think Israel is like? Maybe a counterbalance, like maybe some countries that are maybe small, and maybe to counterbalance this power of influence of the Chinese government. But maybe social media can be a tool that can be used as a way for this. What do you think about?
Well, the reality is like this tool can be used for good or can be used for bad. And the problem that we have is like the main base of cyber-enabled information warfare manipulation and disinformation campaigns are based in targeting the cyber psychology individually, collective, in the society to produce adverse effects on governance. And sadly, what we saw in Hong Kong a couple years ago, what we saw in Taiwan, what we saw in the United States, it's all needs to do with the social media, even the case of George Floyd. In one regards, it can be used to organize people, but because in the internet is an anonymity, you really don't know who is creating those. Well, we saw the Orange Revolution in Russia in 2005. We saw the incident in Belarus and Minsk in the last year. And all those has to deal with cyber-enabled information warfare because the supremacy of the war is not to fight with the enemy to impose my will. It's used to create chaos and create panic in the society, change their perception of reality that they can do the job for me, that they can do something in insurgency or go against the government. So that is a really difficult question because when you see the social media traffic, you saw a lot of traffic is coming from the outside, not even from the country. And it's also bots, automated propaganda, the fakes, fake news, fake videos, and it's used like a very wild west. So I'm sorry, but I can't respond to that question more objectively.
Yes, I agree with you, Israel, and also Charmaine, if you would like to add something to this question about Taiwan regarding your experience.
Could you please refresh to me like which particular part of the question?
Sure. Or it was about Abdullah Mane here. So it was about the pressure of giants in social media, for example. So what I think this is other question, right? From Abdullah. Yeah. But maybe we can use this question because it's maybe involving three of you. So yes, pressure is high on social media giants and regulating bullets and hate speech. So how do these companies reconcile free speech and censorship? Maybe with you, Sharmaine, we can start with your comments.
Well, basically here with the question of Abdullah about the social media giants and all this like cyberbullying, or I would say like propaganda online, especially when they're trying to do. I agree with Professor Israel when he said earlier that there are actually a lot of bots that are doing this. So this is mainly a form of like intimidation, depending on what is the purpose of the state. So I used to work for an artificial intelligence company here in Russia, and we have actually experienced looking at these issues, for example, with the bots and which ones are real and which ones are not. And this is actually like a form of manipulation in this sense. Okay, so in the end, it would actually depend if we talk about like free speech and censorship. I think it would ultimately depend on the viewer if they will believe immediately what they see or not. Like nowadays, people do not really double check if everything that they see is actually true in social media, and if they immediately believe in what these bots are uniformly saying about some certain belief that they're pushing for some certain idea. about like a certain issue or topic, then it's uh, it's actually their very own responsibility to actually take care of the information that they choose to digest. So be vigilant would be actually one of the best ways for people to still allow this freedom of speech to actually be, significant during these times, and to not be swayed by what they immediately see online. So
Thank you. Maybe Professor Israel, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would like to add that one of the challenges that we have here is that the terms of use and conditions of these social media platforms are very unilateral. So there is no other option. So like yes, the freedom of speech is granted in the constitution in many countries, like one of the basic rights for any human. But when you start to sign in for any social media, you have to admit and you have to agree to the terms and conditions of use, which is unilateral. So, in other words, those companies, they have the right to censor your speech and to do not censor the other one. As an example, we saw what happened with Donald Trump. I'm not pro Donald Trump, but used as a precedent, when he was the president of the United States, Twitter decided to cancel his account when we all know that he used that as a media of communications. So yes, there is a problem when you promote violence, when you promote, something which is go against the society and has to be regulated. But in the other hand, where is the state? Where is the state of law? Because in a normal life, a judge has to say that that's wrong and it has been to suspend. But in this case, the private sector, he has the right to don't listen to the judge and don't listen to the person and take their own decision unilateral. And they have a really good base because they say, well, you sign the term of conditions of use. And because you are agreed, now I have the right. And that exactly indeed where is the problem of not regulating these social media platforms and don't regulating the cyberspace, that eventually they turn into weapons against the society. It turns in cyber-enabled information warfare and manipulation, where now these companies, they have a lot of power on you, on what you buy. They know a lot about you, but also they have a lot of power on democracies. And that is also the cyber and the law as a warfare. And that is a real challenge.
Thank you, Professor. And
Since,
Megumi, would you like to add?
I would love to add something. I am very interested in this question because it is precisely what Mani Abdullah is mentioning that has been at the core of the defense of the Chinese government for implementing all of that information control on its people, right? Saying that just leaving the internet to its own is going to create all of this social unrest. It's going to be causing people to be bullied online, especially when it's targeting children or young people. So it becomes a weapon in the hands of those governments that want to control information flow. One of the things that I think that have been managed like very Machiavellically brilliantly is how they have been able to reframe censorship as cleaning the environment, right? Rather than talking about we're censoring you, what we are doing is instead providing with a safe internet. And the more regulation that they want to impose, the more extreme that type of censorship becomes. But it's called something else, and it's seen and sell as something that's positive. And that's what I think it becomes very dangerous because now we see other governments trying to replicate or emulate and even buy the systems that the Chinese are implementing.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can also bridge Abdullah's question with another question of Carlos Nicolaus Salazar about misinformation and fake news manipulation, right? So he's asking, what basic measures should ordinary people from the vulnerable nations observe to ensure cyber safety and avoid manipulation through disinformation, through cyber attacks and fake news? Who would like to answer? Feel free,
Well,
please.
yeah, I mean,
Perfectly.
the reality is like now with artificial intelligence, we're talking about how easy it is to create a deep fake video. It looks so real, it looks authentic, and it really confused the perception of one person or the collective. Um, the reality is like while these companies they don't have safeguards to filter the content and to avoid spreading fake news or deep fakes, it is really hard because once the deep fake or the video is right there, no matter what you think, you have already been influenced because you always will have a second thought. And the problem here is and it's like we talk, it is so delicate and so fine line between the control the content, filter the content, and censor the content. And there is no silver whip, no silver bullet to be protect. The only thing that we can do is educate ourselves, create legislation, but that is between three parties, which is the society, the users, the government, and the owners of this infrastructure. So by they working together, society, government, and the private sector, the owners of this infrastructure, then we can have a better systems to communicate because the internet is good. It gives us, like now, education, information, we can grow, but there always are a very dark side, like the deep web, the dark web, where the very bad things can happen. So we just need to be more conscious when we use these and when we see this content. And yeah, it has the government has responsibility, the users have responsibility, and the owners of these companies they have responsibility. But if right now it's not a leadership and no one's take that responsibility, yes, we are in a trouble. We are in a disinformation and information warfare. And who is affected is the society.
Thank you, Professor Sharmaine. Megumi, would you like to add something?
I think it all begins with.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
muted. Sorry. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It all begins with education, right? Like there's been some efforts in some countries to implement media literacy as part of the programs for young children, students, middle school, high school, and even first years of college to be able to start to look for certain signs of manipulation of messages. Propaganda, after all, has existed ever since communication has been around, right? So these new forms certainly represent challenges, but at the core is the same basic message, right? As Israel was telling us, how this appealing to emotions makes a weapon for information to be the core of manipulation. That is the type of education that is lacking in so many different programs that must be addressed by governments in order for them to have the population itself being able to tell whether they're being manipulated into something or whether they can identify fake news.
Thank you, Megumi. Sharmaine?
I think also in this sense, when it comes to like vulnerable nations, maybe those who do not have enough or sufficient resources when it comes to cybersecurity or enough education, I think it would always be better to double check. Like basically, putting the responsibility on the citizens themselves first of all, like to filter the news that they get in this sense. So, for example, if their government or community cannot provide them with education, then if they are not sure about some certain news, then better not spread it in this sense. So it's like it's a little measure, but it will go a long way as to stopping like from your side this spreading of fake news in this sense.
Thank you again, Sharmaine. So we are following a great time on agenda. If you agree, maybe we can do two final questions just to conclude our our event. And we have this question from Puspita Atirenu, is doing a question for the three panelists. And so what kind of contribution that Asia Pacific has been done to restrain self-interest in stabilizing cyber activities? So maybe we can go with you, Sharmaine, if you agree, because you explained the Asian, and also Professor, I know that you have experience living in the Asian Pacific region, so it will be great combining this experience from as a researcher and also living there.
Well, yeah, in the Five Eyes Alliance, in the program, which is the HLO network, there has a lot of interest in the surveillance program against detecting cyber attacks against specific countries in the alliance. As I said, we have seen very hyperactivity from China since back in 2010, 2011, 2012. The most recently was a year ago, where the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Morrison, admitted publicly, saying that we are under attack by the APT-10. So there is a fact that has happened also in New Zealand. As I said, there is there is a need to create a strategic alliance. There is a need to create international lawfare against cyber attacks. And this is where the things are. We saw that China is becoming very, very aggressive, but it's because they are becoming an economic power. The last year, according to the World Bank, their economy reached the $14 trillion, while the United States was in the $18 trillion. There is a hyper-competitive with United States to define who's gonna control technology, who's gonna control or be the influence in economic power and military power and regional power. And what we see since 4 years ago is that China is becoming really aggressive, specifically in the South Pacific region. That's why it's affecting Philippines, it's affecting Australia, and it's affecting New Zealand, because the balance of power and geopolitics are flipping, are switching. And without doubt, these latest elections in the United States will have an effect that I hope I'm wrong, but it looks like it will create a benefit for China. And the only counterbalance that China has in that scene is Russia, because Russia is also a military power, a regional power. Sadly, it's not an economic power, because Russian economy, according to the World Bank, is staying in 1.4, 1.5 trillion. So the difference between Chinese economic and Russian economic as the two main powers are very different. And then, of course, you have Mongolia in between them, which also in the economy is not very strong. But as a military power, as a regional power, there can be a counterbalance right there. So there is no doubt a flip of the center of gravity in power: economical, military, and technological. And China is becoming very aggressive.
Thank you, Professor. Megumi, Sharmaine, would you like to add something?
Basically, yes. I would also like to add, Professor also mentioned the Five Eyes, which are like practices sharing as well. In the Asia Pacific region, particularly in the Southeast Asian region, for example, there have been talks, because one of the main issues that is hindering like quick cyber threat response is time, and of course the idea of respect for non-interference between the nations, because it doesn't matter if there is a regional cooperation in the Asia Pacific, or for example in the ASEAN, there is the policy of non-interference. So for example, if a certain state says no, then and the cyber threat is spreading around that country, then it will actually hinder the problem from being solved almost immediately. So in this sense, for example, in the Asia Pacific right now, after the pandemic, people are starting to continuously develop more technologies to do this, for example, and perhaps I think maybe in the future there is a possibility that they would actually create or have more members to the Five Eyes, so that, for example, this issue of non-interference would actually be set aside for the sake of preventing more losses from cybersecurity damages.
Yeah, well, a quick one. You start talking about new members in the Five Alliance. The latest update that I got is like Japan. It is became a member of the Five Eyes Alliance, which is a really it gave me a lot of questions because it means like, well, then we have China, we have England, Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand. But now we will be adding Japan. So it looks like, yes, we need to be ready because China is getting very aggressive. We need to have someone really close there. It will be more interesting if they admit Russia as a part of the Five Alliance. That would be very surprising. But they have said, well, that's interesting because that is telling you it's a forecast of how the geopolitics is moving. And well, and how it's moving in the cyberspace, like the space of influence and deterrence, and eventually a cyber warfare.
Professor Megumi, would you like to add some comments?
Yes, I was thinking about how we have to consider that the actors, whenever we're talking about cyber activities, it's not only nation states, but also companies themselves. Thinking about companies like Tencent or Alibaba, who had an enormous amount of information, not just inside China, which is their country of origin and the base for their operations, but also around the region. Companies like Tencent through Weixin, or as it's known in the West, Weibo, have access to the information of millions and millions and millions of people all over. So for them, cybersecurity becomes important. So there has been some efforts on behalf of many of these companies to work with other partners in order to increase their security, but they have been limited by what the government allows them to do, since at the end the government wants to restrict the power of these companies. Something that we saw recently with the case of the huge fine that they gave to Jack Ma's company just a few weeks ago, right? So we always have to consider that cyberspace is, as many other fields in international relations, more and more seeing the surgence of different types of actors that escape the reach of the nation state, but in a way they're still subject to it. So how do they manage these two conflicting areas is something that I would like to get to see addressed in the future.
Thank you so much. Yes, Professor Israel.
Let me use that something very critical because in what we talk about the private sector, especially with companies that they hold a lot of data with like Alibaba and also Huawei. So we know Alibaba and Huawei, they are tied to the People Liberation Army. They have a strategic alliance and by jurisdiction, by law, with the Chinese government. That is a fact. But it's not surprise. That's the same thing in the United States. After the Patriot Act of 2001, the government has the right to go and get the data of Facebook, of LinkedIn, and all those companies. So as we say here, yes, these private companies, they hold a lot of data about people. And that is an asset for intelligence agencies. Now, what these very developed countries use is the law. Like in the United States, the Patriot Act enabled the the intelligence agencies to be able to request information about that data. But in the China, it's the same thing. All these Huawei company and Alibaba, and that's why as soon as you get into China mainland, you have been surveillance 24/7, right? And it's the private company, but it's like the proxy between the government and you, and that is the buffer zone. So that is a fallacia. That is like those private companies, they are working for government, and it is what it is.
Exactly, Professor. And if I will just send the last question about because we have more questions, but I know time is precious. And I will just would like to conclude with this one, and having also bridge with other, I believe, sensible topic, that is ethical use of information. And Professor Israel just talked about this, the use of information. And Evgenia Bolivia is asking, what are the main challenges for deep learning as a game changer in applying machine learning to solve security challenges? Who would like to answer? It's up to you, please.
Well, I just make a brief comment in mathematics. One of the big challenge, well, I study applied mathematics and that's my passion. The big challenge that we have is just to get the right data, because as much data we get, our forecasting and prediction analysis can be very good. But the challenge that we have in the internet is that we have a huge volume of data, which comes at very high speed, like internet speed. And then we have a lot of diversity of data. We have video, audio, text, semantics, linguistics. So the challenge that we have for deep learning, for machine learning, for artificial intelligence is how to be able to classify, clean the data, and then start to use that data. And it's where we spend 85% of the time. We need to clean the data because it came from a different non-homogeneous systems. And then we need to get it almost in real time, clean it very quick, and be able to do a forecast analysis. Because the downside of that is, like, if you get the data and the data is old data, is historical data, then you can create a prediction or forecasting, but you are based on something that happened time ago, and it's not in real time. Now, the idea here of machine learning and deep learning is like, how can we do parallel processing in real time to compute all that data in real time and to be able to create a current forecast about an event? And that is what now we do business intelligence or intelligent agencies, or that is the core of big data analytics, and that is specific. So the challenge is we have a lot of data, but there is a lot of garbage in that data because it's not human sense, it has not been cleaned, it has not been processed, and we cannot use it. And if we use it and it's wrong, well, if a bad input, then bad output. So that's the black box dilemma. Just that one.
Thank you. Megumi, Sharmaine, would you like to add something?
If I may, I want to congratulate whoever sent this question, because this is almost a philosophical question, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about the combination of technology and the ethical decisions that could be taken in terms of security challenges. And one of the things I agree with Israel is how if we feed information, especially considering, I don't know, all of these filter bubbles in which we live in, right? Like, not only can we have very outdated information, as you were pointing out, Israel, but also thinking about how many decisions could be taken out of the already very polarized scores that we can find on the data. So if that's also used for taking decisions as to whether to react or not to a threat that might have been overstated by the data, then we're going to have conflict in place of something that could have been prevented. So I feel like this is something that in the scope of the next few minutes is going to be for us impossible to solve. Definitely, but definitely it's something that we have to keep on thinking. And more, this is why this panel brings us to one step closer to solving this issue, right? Because more and more we're seeing that technology and international relations are linked, and this question perfectly demonstrates it.
Mm-hmm. And also, just a little bit to add to that, when it comes to deep learning and machine learning, for example, when we are trying to develop, we have to keep up with the trends. So, for example, sometimes it's very difficult to keep up with it because people who want to propagate this false information, or people who want to, create these threats, they will also find a way to keep up with the security things, no matter what, even if it's like artificial intelligence or not. So, in that sense, both parties have to be very active because it's seriously challenging to do this, for example.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sharmaine. And Well, as we can see, and as Professor Megumi explained, we are really lucky to have this coherent and comprehensive explanation as a specialist, as a mathematical expert and international relations expert, and also just having this explanation of the geopolitical effect in the region of Asia Pacific. We can understand that the geography, international relations, political science, needs to be a converge in this new dimension of digitalization. So I will appreciate if you will have final remarks to do. So after this, we will conclude our event. Professor Megumi,
I
Professor
may, I can
Israel.
go first. So
Yes,
as
please,
final
Megumi.
remarks, one of the things that we have to consider is to not to fall into the trap of seeing everything in black and white, right? Because that's also part of how conflicts in general arise, but specifically when it's related to the case of China confronting the United States. We have to think about China not as a place of this monolithic power that wants to just take over the world, but rather see the different nuances and also to give credit to the other powers in the region that can become a counterbalance to the growth and the rise of this country.
Thank you, Professor Megumi. Professor Israel, would you like to have final remarks?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be sharing this panel with Megumi and with Sharmaine and with you, Ramses. And then my only remark and comment is like for the audience, like my advice is like we are in this new era of technology, of communication and information, and we are the number one responsible to propagate good information and to have this informed decisions. Continuous education to become more familiar with this, it will be the key to succeed as a society. I also encourage everyone to say no to polarization because I think as a human race, our strength resides in be working together, have unity of effort. And yes, we can disagree in opinions in politics and religion and gender, but at the end of the day, we can have tolerance for the rest of the other and promote a safety environment on internet. That will be my remark. Also, if the audience they want to follow me in YouTube in Israel Reyes, I often put some videos about training for big data analytics using free software like R and Hadoop. And I continually share also videos from my wife, which is expert in cyber psychology from the University of Harvard. And I think it will be a benefit for everyone. So again, was a very good pleasure to go with Sharmaine, with Megumi, and with you, Ramses. Thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you, Professor. And Sharmaine, please.
Yeah, as my final remarks, well, again, thank you so much for giving me this chance to have a talk and to be in the same panel with Professor Israel and Professor Megumi. And for the audience, I would like to advise them, first of all, that now at least hopefully this little topic that we have gave them a little insight of what is actually going on around the world right now. So even with this small contribution that we have for their concept or what is their idea of cybersecurity and geopolitics, they themselves can start helping in their own little ways by, yes, not being too not propagating like polarization, especially in social medias. Like if it's something political, sometimes it is better to stay away from them and do not fight in social medias, especially in a lot of countries, because you are not only, for example, causing some big traffic, for example, like with data and the news, you're also exposing, for example, your own username, and that is also going to be like a little bit of danger for you in social media. So always be careful and be vigilant with your own cyber presence in this sense. And thank you so much. And if you have any questions, you can have my Facebook from here.
Well, thank you again. And I would just want to add that it has been a pleasure having you here. sharing this online platform with such experts and such great insights and information. And for the audience, also, if you have any question, just please write to us in the social media and also to our email, or info@latam-eurasia.com. And also, we will be glad to share our speakers' information in our social media, so you can be in contact directly with them. And just thank you for your being in connected, and see you soon for the next Brunch Latam. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye. Kapaka.